Detection has had to get smart. Discover the lengths detectives go to catch their prey. Told through the most infamous crime stories in history, Catching the Killers. A new series starts Friday at 9 on BBC Two.
This is BBC Two and Newsnight with Jeremy Vine.
A private hospital ran into trouble and so Labour nationalised it. No, it's not a tale from the history books. This is the hospital and it happened today. Good evening. The Heart Hospital in London is moving out of the private sector and back into the NHS because it wasn't doing enough business. The government says it's great news. They've got a bargain. But doesn't it suggest they've also got far too rosy a view of private healthcare? We report on how hundreds of thousands of women from Eastern Europe are being sold into the sex business. Plus, having watched these riots carefully, Naples doesn't want to host a NATO meeting. Is there any international organisation left that can meet in peace? And as the government offers to send troops home from Northern Ireland, should they take a moment to read the writing on the wall in South Armagh? For £27 million, the government acquired a state-of-the-art hospital today after its private sector managers gave up the struggle to make it turn a profit when not enough patients were coming through the door. Under NHS ownership, it will treat some private patients, but most of its customers will get NHS care. So the Heart Hospital in central London has effectively been re-nationalised, something of an obsolete surgical practice under New Labour. The irony will not be lost on health service workers, bracing themselves not for less private sector management, but more. Laura Trevelyan reports.
It's not just private beds the government is buying. Today they bought an entire hospital. That wasn't quite the idea when the Health Secretary Alan Milburn signed the much-trumpeted Concordat with the private sector in October last year. The Concordat was about the health service buying spare private sector beds for NHS patients. Now ministers seem to be bailing out private companies by buying the Heart Hospital. So what happened? This is it, the first hospital to be renationalised since the days of Attlee's Labour government. Founded in 1857, it was first made part of the NHS in 1947. After falling into disuse in 1989, it was given a spanking new refit and reopened as a private hospital in 1998. As today's knockdown price shows, though, the glory days didn't last long. It's no surprise the government leapt at the chance to buy this hospital half price. After all, Labour's second term in office is meant to be all about delivering improvements in the public services, particularly the NHS. With the private finance initiative mired in controversy, this must have seemed like a great buy.
I think this is fantastic value for the health service, not just for the hospitals that I'm responsible for, but for our staff and, most importantly, for our patients. What we're going to be able to do here is to essentially double the number of NHS major heart operations and, as a consequence, substantially reduce our waiting lists and waiting times.
The presence of the Health Minister Hazel Blears at the hospital today shows how keen Labour are to claim this as a triumph. And although Whitehall officials say the government's not abandoning its hospital building programme in favour of buying failed private ones, in London at least it seems there may be more opportunities.
Certainly there are a large number of private hospitals in London, and many of them have very low occupancy rates in relation to that which we'd expect in the health service. So I'm sure opportunities like this will present themselves in the future.
Government in shock renationalisation of hospital has proved something of a poser for the trade unions. They're pleased that 1,400 cardiac patients will be treated here a year, twice the number currently seen by the University College London Hospitals Trust. However, the fact that doctors here will continue to treat private patients, 400 annually it's estimated, has gone down less well.
Well, there must be a danger of cross-subsidy between the NHS and the private sector. I mean, basically, the NHS is now providing the facilities which are going to be used by private patients. We don't know the details of how much the private sector is going to pay for using those facilities. We don't know whether the NHS is going to make a profit on it or whether there's going to be some subsidy going in the other direction.
The government says it's in favour of pragmatism in healthcare rather than ideology. But confusion over the boundaries between the private sector and the public services reigns.
It is a raging debate at the moment, and it is not going to go away. I'm delighted that the Parliamentary Health Select Committee has taken on a formal examination of private sector involvement in the NHS, and I think this will really get to the bottom of it and prove what is best value and what isn't.
Government ministers claim there's no downside to this purchase. Indeed, the hospital believes the Prime Minister himself would have been here today to publicise this deal were he not holidaying in Mexico. However, the story of how this hospital, which cost more than £60 million to buy and transform, was sold for just £27.5 million, does provide ammunition to critics of the government's love affair with the private sector. The Heart Hospital blame their failure to make money and subsequent purchase by the NHS on what they claim are monopolistic practices by one of the big private health insurance companies, PPP. Newsnight first reported on such allegations back in 1999, when the Office of Fair Trading launched an inquiry into the private medical companies and their operation of private hospitals. Although the OFT cleared the companies of uncompetitive practices, at the Heart Hospital, they still feel hard done by.
Without PPP's recognition, we weren't able to attract their patients and we weren't able to attract the doctors with them.
Why were you not able to get PPP's recognition? What was the issue there?
Well, the issue there was that PPP, firstly, when we first thought about the redevelopment, said that they would recognise us, but then they had a change of management and they decided to purchase virtually 50% in the Columbia hospitals in central London, who are a direct competitor to the Heart Hospital.
But the private health insurance company defend their decision not to send their patients to the Heart Hospital.
Well, clearly, as a consequence of overcapacity, we have to select a limited number. We assessed all the hospitals on a range of criteria covering quality and value for money, and the Heart Hospital simply couldn't provide the same level on those criteria as could others.
For those suspicious of the private sector, the hospital's failure is salutary.
The government has been saying that we need more involvement with the private sector, and yet we've seen that private sector management cannot always be relied on to fulfil the contract that it's entered into. So I would hope that this would give some cause for rethinking the nature of the relationship.
All the turbulence in the government's second term has been caused by the stormy question of the private sector's role in public services. Unless the government can find 100 more hospitals to buy up, the forecast is for more storms to come.
Laura Trevelyan reporting. A little earlier this evening, I asked the Health Minister, Hazel Blears, if this purchase of a private hospital marked a change in government policy.
Not a change of policy, no. It was just a really good opportunity to get a hospital with 95 beds, 62 nurses, doctors, technicians, at a really bargain price. We'll be able to double the number of patients who get their heart operations, NHS patients, and it's really, really good news for patients and their families.
But surely, as a Labour minister with a Labour government, you are rejoicing in your heart at the fact that you're renationalising something.
I don't think it's nationalisation, but I'm absolutely delighted that we've got the chance to increase capacity. The NHS desperately needs more beds, more doctors, more nurses, and we managed to do that all in one fell swoop here.
But it is renationalising it, isn't it? Because the NHS had it before, it then went private, now you're buying it back.
Well, what happened was, in fact, it was empty when it was sold off because we've moved the beds that were there back into an NHS hospital. So the private developers actually almost flattened the site. They actually spent £60 million on it. We've bought it for 27.5. So it really is a good deal for the public sector.
On a point of fact, why is it that when the NHS has got so many heart patients waiting for treatment, this hospital was standing empty a lot of the time, when actually you have no problem, we're told, with sending NHS patients to off for private treatment?
Yeah, exactly right, and that's how this situation arose. ULCH actually were talking to the London Heart Hospital about the possibility of partnership working, and as those negotiations developed, it became apparent that the hospital was in real financial trouble, and therefore this solution has been found, which is in everybody's best interest.
Yes,
so
but why were there so many empty beds before now? Why weren't there NHS patients in those beds?
Because the hospital was trying to operate as a private concern. It was desperate to recoup its investment and was trying to be a player within the private sector market. For commercial reasons, it didn't manage to do that, but its clinical performance is absolutely first rate. So this is a solution that meets certainly the needs of the NHS.
But doesn't it bother you that when it was in the private sector, it didn't pull its weight for the NHS, and now it's going back into the public sector? It's going to have, we're told, 600 private patients a year in it.
At the moment, it has about 600 private patients. We envisage that that number will probably come down somewhat, and NHS patients' numbers will go up, because clearly they've struggled to get the 600 a year in there at the moment. We've got plenty of NHS patients to be putting through that hospital, and what it will mean is that locally we'll be able to more than double the number of life-saving operations that people can get access to.
What is the understanding that you have about when this hospital was first offered for sale and how much for?
The contractual details that I'm aware of is that the contract's been concluded for £27.5 million. I'm not aware of any other figures being talked about. I do know that the negotiations have taken a few weeks to sort out the details, but I'm not aware of any other offers or bids that have been made.
Our understanding is that it was on sale before Christmas for £20 million.
I'm not aware of that.
Does that bother you?
As I say, I'm not aware of that. I don't know what the details were. What I do know is that the NHS, for £27.5 million, has not only got 95 beds, it's also got 62 nurses, doctors, therapists, state-of-the-art equipment, world-class facilities, and I actually think it's a really, really good deal.
Yes, but when you look at this situation and the way it's come about, doesn't it strike you that it's an example of private sector management going wrong?
No, what it says is that that company, for particular commercial reasons, wasn't able to get on the referral list for the major private insurers, and therefore they took a financial risk. That risk didn't come off for them, but their clinical work is absolutely first-rate, top quality.
What were those reasons, though?
The reasons for the commercial failure, I think, have been stated by Sir Richard Needham, who was the chair, and that was that they simply failed to negotiate with the private providers.
And that's not mismanagement?
Absolutely nothing to do with their clinical standards, which are some of the best in this country, if not the world.
Ah, but that's the point, isn't it? Because we're told now that, under the second term of the Labour government and so on, you're going to be reaching out to the private sector, not just for clinical expertise, but also for what private sector management can help the NHS with. And that's where this has failed.
Well, that was a commercial situation where they were hoping to get private sector patients. The NHS is not in that business. The business we're in is treating National Health Service patients, and this will mean that we can double the number of operations, they'll be waiting far shorter times, and they'll actually get world-class facilities. I don't think that any of that is a poor deal for the NHS. I think it's a fantastic deal for us.
Yeah, but it does look, doesn't it? What we've seen today of the private sector healthcare in London makes it look shambolic, and therefore it's quite incomprehensible that you should be reaching out to it for anything other than clinical help.
I think it's quite incomprehensible that on a day when we've managed to get 95 extra heart care beds, 62 nurses, doctors, technicians and state-of-the-art facilities, that we shouldn't all actually be celebrating what is a marvellous achievement in getting patients treated more quickly, relieving themselves and their families of huge amounts of stress, and being able to do what the NHS does best, and that is look after the patients who need care.
Hazel Bliss, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
The sex trade in places as diverse as Jerusalem and Kosovo is being fed by hundreds of thousands of women from Eastern Europe. In fact, the latest figures from the International Organization for Migration show that last year alone, over 500,000 were trafficked into the sex trade against their will. They ended up in brothels in Western Europe, Israel, Turkey, and increasingly Kosovo. And one of the chief victims in all of this appears to be Europe's poorest country, Moldova. Sue Lloyd-Roberts reports.
It's not unusual in any church today to find that it's the women who take the burden of responsibility for a community's religious life. What is unusual in the village of Skoren is that there are only children and old women at prayer. Nearly all the women in the village between the ages of 18 and 30 are gone.
They go to Italy, Portugal, Turkey, even Moscow. They can't stay here. There's no work and no money. I can't tell you how many, but they've all gone.
In the Soviet era, it was the norm for women to work. In Moldova today, over 2/3 of them are unemployed.
It's very hard nowadays. All the businesses have closed. Before, there were state enterprises, plants, factories. You could get prosecuted for not having a job.
I met a family who admitted that they were pleased when a woman called Tanya came to the village and offered their 18-year-old daughter a job abroad. Elena promised to phone, but never did. The family later learned that Tanya sells girls to a pimp in Istanbul.
My husband died because of it. Before he died, all he would say was, "How could this happen to her? That woman took our little girl and sold her. Where did she sell her? Where did she take her?" I went to the police, and they said they couldn't help me. Please, please help me. Help find her for us. From the bottom of my heart, I beg you to help me.
An estimated 50 or 60 girls a month are being shipped out of Moldova. Many of them can be found here, in the nightclubs of Istanbul, where the floor shows involve Moldovan and Russian girls dancing zombie-like for their audience. The bar owner charges clients $100 an hour for time spent in a girl's company. But with pimps and customers around, I was unlikely to get help looking for one missing Moldovan village girl here. I tried again in daylight and was referred to the bus depot, where Moldovans tend to collect.
I saw her a month ago. She was after a job.
People here said they'd seen her a few weeks ago and that she was looking for work. The women told me that she had most likely escaped from whoever had been holding her in a bar or brothel, but was now too scared to go home. I was told to fill out a petition and take it to the Missing Persons Bureau. Official typists sit outside government buildings here, preparing the necessary documents. This one told me that he'd done dozens of petitions for the parents of Moldovan girls. At the government office, they probably only gave me time because I was a foreign journalist making inquiries. They said they had thousands of missing girls on their books and that my search was hopeless. If Elena did escape from her kidnappers, then there's a chance that she might already be back in Moldova. The anti-trafficking unit of the migration organization are rescuing hundreds of girls from bars and brothels and sending them back to their countries of origin. However, the girls seldom go home. After all, they'd promised their families that they would bring them wealth. Instead, they return with their few belongings in plastic bags. These girls have been repatriated from Kosovo, where thousands of international troops are now based. They, and the ones who've returned before them, don't want their families to recognize them.
I don't want them to know. They'll be angry with me. The truth is that I don't want them to find out what really happened. They wouldn't understand.
They prefer to rely on charity workers and enroll on training programs in the capital, Chisinau, rather than go back to their villages, where they'd be branded prostitutes. Monica believes her parents would probably reject her.
I just couldn't tell them anything. That's the problem. My parents are strict people and I'm scared. They simply wouldn't understand how it all happened. This man offered me work as a teacher in Italy. And then he took me and 3 other girls to Belgrade and put us in a flat where there were dozens of other girls. He took our passports and sold me for £600 to a man who owns a bar in Kosovo. They threatened us, saying, "We've bought you now and we can do what we like with you."
We have heard that girls who have been trafficked are being used by the international forces there, the peacekeeping forces. Is this true?
I don't know myself that they're being used or not, because I wasn't used as a prostitute, so I don't know. But I know from others that the soldiers stationed there do use girls like us. They go to the bars to do it.
Of course, if she wouldn't tell her own mother how she was abused, she was unlikely to tell me. Mariana Patasel is the director of the charity who looks after these girls, along with hundreds of street children who emerged in Moldova after the collapse of the Soviet Union. She says there was simply no one else around to help the abused and traumatized young women when they began arriving back. She was told a different story about the girls I interviewed by the International Military Police who rescued them in Kosovo.
The 2 girls who you were talking to are of course now denying that they were sexually abused because they're ashamed. I know for a fact that they were gang raped. It was in their original statements. These men use violent rape to intimidate these girls. If we look at these files, we see that in 3 years, more than 500 victims have been repatriated. And when I say victims, I mean girls and women between the ages of 12 and 40. Unfortunately, the traffickers don't bother to take young age into consideration. In fact, the younger the girls are, the more valuable and profitable they are for them. They recruit underage girls and destroy them by forcing them into prostitution. It's our womanhood, the future of our country, that's being destroyed. This is a catastrophe.
For as long as the money from the charity lasts, the girls who return live together in safe houses. Girls have been known to be kidnapped off the streets, and so they spend most of the time inside to escape potential abusers, but not their nightmares.
The last one to buy me was a very cruel man. He was violent and aggressive. He said he'd already killed 8 men. And he told me, "I can shoot you any time I want if you don't do what I say." And then he would abuse me. If you are a weak person, you'd go mad. If you make trouble when they move you from place to place, they kill you. Human life means nothing to them. They just take you away and shoot you.
Back in the village, I told Elena's mother that I had failed to find her daughter, and she assumed that she must be dead. She regretted that there'll never be a conventional village funeral like this for her to mourn Elena. The tragedy is that parents are believing they've lost daughters who may be alive and who are simply afraid to go home. Little news about the scale of the sex trade gets back here. Aid agencies working in the area are bringing out alarming reports with increasing regularity about the trafficking of women from Eastern Europe. They recommend new legislation, more police awareness, better support for women who return. But above all, they say the solution lies back here in the villages. Alleviate poverty, they say. Bring economic development to women in rural areas to stop them leaving in the first place. Next month, international anti-trafficking units are moving into the villages of Moldova to start programs to educate young women about the dangers of sex slavery. But the fear is, for as long as Moldova remains the poorest country in Europe and unable to feed its people, girls will take risks and try their luck abroad.
Sue Lloyd-Roberts reporting. High-ranking members of NATO may well be thumbing through their atlases tonight, having heard that after all the trouble at the G8 summit in Genoa, the mayor of Naples now doesn't want them in town, as arranged in September. The Italian president is also worrying out loud about a UN food conference fixed for November in Rome, while his police chief has now publicly admitted the obvious, that excessive force was used against demonstrators last month. So, if NATO can't even defend its own meetings, what strategies will the authorities and the protesters adopt now? Richard Watson reports.
The historic city of Naples. Locals used to living in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius are balking at the impending meeting of NATO defence ministers, scheduled for the end of September. The previous centre-left Italian government actually petitioned NATO to hold this year's summit here. But after last month's devastation in the northern Italian city of Genoa, the mayor of Naples wants out. But that, according to others, could prove tricky.
I mean, you cannot let the demonstrators decide your agenda. I mean, what are we going to do? Are we going to ask the demonstrators whether we can have the meeting or not? This would be improper for any country.
Last month in Genoa, 300,000 people took to the streets. A hardcore of anarchists were bent on trouble. There were allegations of police brutality against peaceful protesters, and they're still being investigated. One demonstrator was killed, described by some as the first martyr for the cause.
There was an awful lot of interest round about the time when Genoa was happening. There was something like 200,000 people per day hitting the Genoa section of Urban 75 alone.
Mike Slocum, who runs this website dedicated to direct action, says after Genoa, the mayor of Naples is right to be concerned. Do you think it's surprising now that the mayor of Naples has apparently come out and said, look, she doesn't want to have NATO conference held in her city anymore?
Well, frankly, would you? I mean, you can't blame it, because now obviously a whole load of trouble comes with it. You know, that's not to say protesters are necessarily forming the trouble, but the whole circus that surrounds it. There's usually a media almost egging on for violence. They want the sexy shots. There will be, for sure, a minority of the black bloc and whoever else dying for a ruck. And also, there'll be an awful lot of police. And if it's anything to go like when Genoa happened, they'll be up for a fight too.
The problem for the authorities in Italy and elsewhere is the extraordinary level of international support for these mass protests. There's been a huge turnout at a long list of political and economic summits against institutions like the G8 group of leading nations, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. But with the threat against NATO in Naples, the target range is being extended.
People are aware, really, that it's not just a case of nasty Gap and nasty McDonald's. It's all part of a bigger thing. And I think that NATO, to some people, is seen as behind, is actually sort of propping up an awful lot of the capitalism which they despise. I think a lot of people feel completely disassociated with the democratic process. I mean, I think you ask the average person in the street what influence they have on NATO, I think the answer is none.
But there appears to be some concern within the protest movement about the policy of pursuing economists and politicians around the globe. One essay posted on the net about so-called summit hopping spoke of the bankruptcy of the approach, of predictable demonstrations tightly controlled by the state, which are coming to dominate the concept of direct action and campaigns.
Right, no, see there's some black wire.
Amongst the tomato plants at the Green Adventure project in South London, local people have taken over dilapidated council greenhouses to grow flowers and organic food. Not as exhilarating, perhaps, as taking on the organs of state in foreign lands, but according to the people who run it, themselves veterans of anti-capitalist marches, every bit as important.
You get out there in the middle of winter in your wellies and a spade and you start digging for no one else's benefit but the community at large. That is direct action.
You can't just be against something without being for something. You've got to walk the talk. So, this is local, this is in Brixton, this will improve our environment, and it will also mean that we can eat food that we grow and we won't have to be eating corporate food, which doesn't taste very nice.
They may be mellowing out here, but they still back those who take to the streets. And the huge level of support for mass protests is putting transnational organisations firmly on the back foot. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are trying to limit the risk by combining their annual general meetings at Washington in September. And the World Trade Organization has decided to meet well away from budget airfare destinations in the remote Arabian state of Qatar. And rumours are circulating that the next G8 summit of the world's leading nations will be secreted away in the heart of the Canadian Rockies.
It's obviously going to be hard for 300,000 tobogganers to get together. So there is a bunker mentality. It is quite clear now where the lines are drawn. Because, the big battle of this century is people versus profit motives, which comes down to, are we going to let the transnational multinationals run the world completely?
Some warn of an escalation of violence if a bunker mentality is adopted.
I think you'll get a hardcore militant group that will become ever more militant and, possibly try to undermine society through bombing, etc. I think there's a real change going on, but at the same time, I think it's quite scary and unsettling in terms of whether society is really as stable as it has been.
The latest concern in Naples about the NATO summit is clear evidence that anti-capitalist protests are working. Big set political and economic events will either be driven underground or governments must trust that the protesters run out of steam.
Richard Watson reporting. We're joined now by Guy Taylor of Globalised Resistance and also Professor Victor Bulmer-Thomas of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. Guy Taylor, are you a global organisation?
No, we're very much a British-based organisation at the moment, addressing many of the global issues.
But making a global protest?
Yeah, well, I mean, our members do travel out to protests like Genoa, because these issues affect people in the UK. I mean, Tony Blair at the moment is introducing a structural adjustment programme onto Britain, privatising our hospitals. All the agreements you see going through the WTO and all the rest of it are affecting people in the localities here. So they're issues which affect each and every one of us, and we've got something to say about it.
But surely, as your organisation's protests spread, they begin to embody what it is you're protesting against.
Yeah, I think it's very much a case of we have the international things. There is so much of the local stuff going on as well at the moment, and that is going to kind of pick up. It is building in every single way.
What do you think, Professor Bulmer-Thomas?
Well, I think that the movement that Guy is talking about inevitably will have global implications, because where I differ from him is, of course, that I regard globalization as, to a large extent, an irreversible process, and one that brings with it substantial benefits, even at the risk of a certain downside, which is the concentration of wealth, concentration of power, and possibly a widening of the gap between poor and rich countries, although that's still very debatable. So the issue then for me is, how do you deal with that? And I would put much more stress on using the powers that still exist at national level in order to have greater emphasis on competition policy, for example.
Right, but the first issue is how these world leaders actually meet each other, because it's getting rather difficult. NATO are having problems, as we heard, assembling in Naples. What should they do?
Well, I think that the sort of knee-jerk reaction of the Italian authorities is the wrong one. I mean, I do understand why the mayor of Naples, or indeed Berlusconi in the case of the FAO in Rome, have taken this position, but the truth is it's a classic example of the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. I don't believe for one moment they're suggesting that NATO should never meet or the FAO should never meet. They're just saying we don't want it in our backyard, and that doesn't seem to me a very responsible attitude.
It's not surprising they don't want their cities trashed, is it?
No, I think in the short term it's an understandable, even if it's a misguided attitude, because at some point somebody has to address the fundamental issue here, which is to what extent the right of protesters to protest is itself being undermined by a small and very violent minority who are set on wrecking the proceedings.
Guy Taylor, are you happy that one of these meetings, it looks like, moving to the Rockies?
Yeah, I mean, I think wherever they go, there's going to be opposition to it.
But you're happy with driving them out of cities, are you?
Well, the thing is that they cannot take these decisions to withdraw into the Rocky Mountains or into the desert in Qatar without actually having to at least think about the fact is they are very unpopular. People are, 300,000 people is a huge demonstration. They're isolated. They're feeling on the defensive. I think that's a good thing.
Are there any international organisations you would not demonstrate against?
None I can think of at the moment. I mean, I'm sure there's many, but the fact of the matter is that these international organisations which are paying attention only to the corporate tune at the moment, they're representing the corporate programme.
International Climate Change Conference?
Yeah, well, that's had demonstrations outside it, and quite rightly so, because our leaders, our so-called leaders, are not addressing these issues at all. We've seen George Bush, dump on the Kyoto Agreement. The fact of the matter is that these things are absolutely vital. They're putting the corporate agenda first, and they've got to start paying attention to the protesters, to the people we represent, and to the people who support us, because that's where they're going to actually start undermining the protesters, if they start reaching some of our very reasonable demands.
And in a sense, Professor, when they end up in the Rockies, they are endorsing the protests, aren't they?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that the movement to the Rockies doesn't really help anything. For one thing, although they claim that it will get back to the original conception of the G7 or the G8, that's just not true. It's not going to be a fireside chat. If you have each delegation bringing up to 40 people, that's nearly 300, 350 people who are going to be there. That's not a small meeting. Similarly, the Rockies may not be as accessible as Genoa, but they're not exactly the end of the world. It's not difficult for protesters to get there if they want.
So what do they do?
Well, I think this is a time for cool heads and strong nerves. And there are two things that are going on here that must be respected. One is the right of nations and their representatives to meet internationally when there is a good reason to do so. And the second is the right of protesters to make their point in peaceful demonstrations and marches and all the rest of it when they feel the right to do so. And normally that has not been a problem. The problem has arisen because in recent meetings there has been a very small minority of extremely violent protesters on whom the media have concentrated a great deal of their attention, and who unfortunately have confused these basic issues. We have to get back to what these things are really about.
And Guy Taylor, if you were the mayor of Naples, would you want NATO to meet there?
Absolutely not, but I want to take issue with this point about who's the violence coming from. The report clearly said, and the people, the mayor of Genoa has also stated that the police were completely out of order there. It was the police that provoked all the violence. They were provoking people, putting agent provocateurs in the thing. If that issue is addressed, if we actually see sensible policing, or at least people addressing the issues, not the violence, if that is addressed, then I think you can see this peaceful protest, which the vast majority of people on these protests are determined to see go forward.
Guy Taylor and Professor Bulmer-Thomas, thank you both. Well, August the 12th is the final deadline by which the parties in Northern Ireland must reach agreement if they don't want the Assembly dissolved and new elections held. To bring the sides together, the British and Irish governments suggested last week that more troops could be pulled out and some army bases closed. That was read as an effort to allow Republicans to say they'd pocketed more than enough gains to make decommissioning a price worth paying. But in fact, it is just underscoring the gulf between communities on the ground, as Liz McKean found out in South Armagh.
"20 years on, and the IRA hunger strikes are remembered in the Republican heartland of South Armagh. These replica H-block cells are on display in Camloth, borrowed from the set of a film co-written by Brian Campbell. His stretch as an IRA prisoner came after the hunger strikes. He believes that without them there would be no peace process.
It's seen really by people as being a watershed in like recent Irish history. The peace process began. There was like Republicans became involved like in like electoral politics. There was also, it was the end of the British attempts to criminalise the struggle here in Ireland. So therefore people do see the 20th anniversary as really hugely significant.
But despite the peace process, the view on the ground is that military activity has increased. Helicopter sorties are round the clock. Local children may be used to it, but their parents are resentful. In the garrison village of Bessbrook, there are frequent complaints at the intrusion.
Over the last 30 years and right up until the present day, the only armed people, the only gunmen that the children in this school in this area would have seen would be armed RUC patrols and British Army patrols, either walking past the school here or occasionally through the school grounds. And I don't see how that can be at all helpful in the current process we're in, where we're all seeking for a final solution to the conflict.
Plans for so-called normalisation are outlined in the London-Dublin rescue package. Crucially, they depend on the continuing implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and the Chief Constable's assessment of the threat at the time. In other words, they depend on a political breakthrough this week. Sinn Féin's president is not sounding hopeful. The fault, says Gerry Adams, is not the lack of IRA decommissioning, but the unionist response to it.
If the move forward by the IRA isn't seen in its historic and other significance, well then how is this going to be sorted out? And if in a number of days' time, because the unionists have set their faces against embracing this change, if the institutions are going to be pulled down, what will that do to public confidence? What will that do to confidence in politics?
Republicans have consistently argued their confidence will be boosted by scaling back the army presence. At the time of the 1994 IRA ceasefire, more than 18,500 troops were stationed in Northern Ireland. That's been reduced to 13,500. In South Armagh, the levels have remained constant at around 600 troops. The area is also fortified with 4 army bases and 14 observation posts. Republicans in South Armagh claim to be mystified at the preoccupation with IRA decommissioning. The weaponry that has the biggest impact on their lives is in the hands of the British Army and the police. Demilitarisation is just another issue where opinion is polarised. For unionists living in this area, the army presence is like a security blanket. Without it, they'd feel vulnerable.
This is where the Kingsmill massacre happened here, where they shot the 10 workmen. My uncle was shot there, and my father there, and my other uncle was shot there.
William Fraser's group supports many of the families who've been bereaved by paramilitary violence. There are hundreds of them, and they want the army to stay.
There would be no law and order. There'd be no security whatsoever in this part of the community.
And they believe they still need it?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. These people's mindset has not changed. Nothing has changed as far as the belief of the Republican movement, and especially in South Armagh. They still believe that they have the right to go out and kill in the name of a united Ireland. And until that mindset change, there can be no demilitarisation in South Armagh.
Assessment of the paramilitary threat comes down to the Chief Constable, but ultimately the decision on what to do is political. On both sides, the dissidents have been busy, making the risks of that decision all too obvious.
Liz McKean reporting. In a moment, to look at tomorrow's papers, but first a roundup of today's news stories. And our main story tonight, the government has renationalised a failing private hospital. Speaking on Newsnight, the health minister denied the NHS was cashing in on the failures of the private sector. Fighting flared up again in Macedonia today after a military convoy was ambushed by Albanian guerrillas. 10 soldiers were killed in the attack while troops were travelling between Skopje and the northwestern city of Tetovo. Despite this renewed fighting, Western mediators are still insisting a deal to avert civil war is possible. Joining me now from Lake Ochrid is our foreign correspondent, Jonathan Charles. Do you think it's possible, Jonathan?
It's looking pretty grim tonight, Jeremy. We've just had a statement from Macedonia's National Security Council, which includes the President, the Prime Minister, the Interior Minister and the Defence Minister. And this statement says there needs to be an immediate Macedonian military offensive against ethnic Albanian rebels, and there can be no question of implementing any peace treaty until they're pushed back. So it looks as though we're in for quite a long period of military activity. The Macedonians are very, very angry by today's events and the attack on their convoy by ethnic Albanian rebels. And although all the parties here at Lake Ochrid said they backed, or told the negotiators they backed a peace agreement, I think the question still remains about whether it's going to be signed on Monday at this grand signing ceremony, this peace deal grand signing ceremony, as the European Union have been suggesting.
So the danger here is then that it starts to look for Macedonia as if signing up to the deal will be backing down in some way.
Yes, I think Macedonian government has a difficult situation. How do Macedonian politicians sell to very angry Macedonians this peace deal? Ordinary Macedonians want military action. They don't want a peace deal. They feel that a deal of that sort rewards the ethnic Albanian rebels for their aggression. And we're seeing some of that anger amongst Macedonians tonight. In one of the towns where the dead soldiers came from, they're now burning Albanian shops and a mosque. And they've also broken into the army barracks to take weapons and ammunition. This is civilians breaking into the army barracks. Things are on a dangerous road here. And I think now Macedonia really is at the crossroads. It'll either be civil war or the government has to try to pull the position back. But there's certainly no question at the moment of an early implementation of this peace deal.
Jonathan, thanks very much indeed. Farmers in North Yorkshire have today been accused of ignoring strict rules to prevent the spread of foot and mouth. Trading standards officers say they've uncovered more than 150 breaches of disinfection procedures near the town of Thirsk. The regulations were imposed in the area last week to prevent the spread of the disease. Essex police are investigating the death of a 9-year-old boy during a routine hospital operation. Tony Clues was under anaesthetic for an operation on his finger at Broomfield Hospital in Chelmsford when his oxygen tube became blocked. The hospital has admitted breaking manufacturer's guidelines by allowing the tube to be used more than once. Police are also looking at a similar incident at Basildon Hospital. In that case, the patient recovered. An American space probe that aims to collect particles from the sun has been launched at Cape Canaveral. The Genesis mission is designed to capture what's called the solar wind, which scientists hope will help them answer questions about the composition of the sun. Early reports from Mission Control say everything so far has gone according to plan. And the markets, the FT100 share index was down, while in New York the Dow Jones closed down 165. Against the pound, the euro was up, and against the dollar, sterling was down 0.35. Just to look then at tomorrow morning's front pages if we can. The Guardian, first of all, front page, IRA ready to begin decommissioning arms, they say. And a picture on the front page, you can see there the athlete, Paula Radcliffe, who came fourth in the 10,000 metres, being apparently remonstrated with by her husband. The Financial Times front page leads on Blair and Ahern hold Irish crisis talks. They've been last night, they say, holding crisis talks over the Northern Ireland peace process. Times, hard times ahead, says gloomy Bank of England is their front page lead. And plonkers say the Sun, BBC pay, fiasco hits Del Boys. Come back. That's all from Newsnight tonight, but there's round-the-clock news coverage on BBC News 24. Kirsty will be back with more tomorrow. So until then, from all of us on the programme, very good night.
Hello, good evening. We had some very miserable weather for some eastern coast today. Just look at Newcastle. Heavy rain, a chilly north wind, more like October really, and a high of 14 Celsius. And in fact, they collected over 1.5 inches of rain. Now that was all linked to that low pressure area sitting just to the east of us today, but thankfully it's getting a bit of a move on now and it is heading out into Scandinavia. There will still be some showers around tomorrow, but they'll tend to ease off later in the day. And as you can see, it does look as though we're in for a bit of a change as an area of high pressure slowly moves in. Still for tomorrow, though, expect a fair few showers. They'll start off around southern and western areas through the morning, particularly Wales, southwest England, possibly the West Midlands. In fact, this is an area we'll have to watch through the morning rush hour. You may well catch some fairly intense downpours, so something to keep an eye on tomorrow morning. And they'll gradually clear the southwest, but move into more eastern parts of England, rumbling on into the evening. For more western areas, though, a hint of that change with some quieter, sunny weather later in the day. A bit of a breeze, though, a fairly cool northwesterly breeze, so temperatures around 17 or 18 for Belfast and southwest Scotland, a high in the south of around 20, which is much as we had today. Still fairly breezy conditions around southern coasts. A hint, though, of that settled weather, and I should think for Friday it'll be good for most of us with some sunshine, the winds easing as well. But all change again through the weekend. Not a lot of rain in the south, but for northern areas it'll become cloudier and we will see some rain spilling in on Sunday. So if you've got plans for the weekend, I know you'll want to know the detail. Let's start with Saturday then. And as I said, a good deal of cloud pulling its way eastwards, some drizzle around, maybe some of these western coasts seeing some drizzly rain, say Cumbria into western Scotland. But there will also be little bits of sunshine poking through. So Northern Ireland, you may be lucky. Say East Wales, the West Midlands, you may see a hint of sunshine. And when the sun breaks through, it'll feel pleasantly warm. Now for Sunday, an active front moving in. At the moment, it looks as though the wettest weather will affect northwestern parts of the British Isles. But at least that means much of the south will be dry, if rather cloudy.
In a mystery 1,200 years old, one man stood against the establishment.
I set out on a quest to resolve the age-old mystery of what happened to the Maya.
Discover what caused millions to perish. The terrible truth of the ultimate contest. Nature against civilization. The secret of the Maya revealed.
It's just hard to accept. It's counterintuitive.
Ancient Apocalypse, tomorrow at 9 on BBC Two.
It's 1981 and England are about to lose the Ashes again.
It seemed like Mission Impossible.
When one man changed the script.
Big hit, glorious shot.
Batsman, bowler, hell